Good morning, everybody. Our class is a little bit ahead of Miss Idstein's class on this part, so I thought I would talk y'all through this because most of this we did before. This is going to just be review, so you should be able to follow along and get through the worksheets fairly quickly as long as you understood what we did with factoring before. If you are struggling a little bit with factoring, this will be a good opportunity to go back and refresh because everything we do from this point forward you're going to need to be able to factor both in this chapter and in the next chapter. So this first part, this is the very last thing that we did as factoring, and we looked at just factoring out the GCF. So remember we talked about like this, where it's just two terms, and you can see that the C is missing. So when C is missing, what you want to do is just factor out the GCF. So you look at the two numbers, 3 and 9. We'll go into both of those as 3. And then you look at your two variables, x squared and x. Remember, you always pick the smallest exponent. Well, that one has an exponent of 2. That one has an understood exponent of 1. So I'm going to get 1. And then you put in the parentheses what you would have left after you factored that out. So 3 divided by 3 is 1. And then remember, when you divide with variables, you subtract their exponents. 2 minus 1 is 1. So I'll just have plain x. Bring down my plus. And then for 9x, 9 divided by 3 is 3. X to the first, that factors out completely. 1 minus 1 is 0, so there's no x. And I get that as my final answer. And notice there's nothing left to factor. We want this thing inside the parentheses to be linear, meaning it has an exponent of 1. And so I have something linear on the outside, something linear on the inside. I have done as much as I can do. All right, let's scoot over here to number 2. So I look at these. Some of y'all struggled a little bit with these when we did these in class. Look at the numbers first. 6, 18, and 12. Well, 6 will go into all of those. So now I'm going to look at my variables, x squared, x, and no x. Well, they don't have any variable in common because the 12 doesn't have an x. The only thing I can factor out is a 6. So let's divide. 6 divided by 6 is 1. So I'm going to have x squared minus 18 divided by 6 is 3. And I didn't factor out the x, so I've still got that x there. And 12 divided by 6 is 2. All right, so I noticed that what I have in my parentheses is quadratic. What I have here, maybe I can factor again. So let's see. Let's do AC. AC, A, looking inside the parentheses is that understood 1 in front of the x squared. Remember, when we do A times C, we just look at numbers. We don't use the variables because it's the coefficient. So I've got a 1 right here and a 2 right there. 1 times 2 is 2. All right, so I want to see if I can come up with two numbers that multiply to be 2 and add to be negative 3. Well, I can do that. I'm going to use the numbers negative 1 and negative 2. Negative 1 times negative 2 is positive 2. Negative 1 plus negative 2 is negative 3. Okay, so let's skip down here. All right, I'm going to leave the 6 on the outside of the parentheses. Remember, this first one doesn't change. I'm going to leave that as x squared. And then my negative 3 is what I'm going to change. The one with the b is what changes. And I'm going to replace that with the negative 1 that I had before. Remember, I have to put an x on that. You have to have the same variable as you do right here, negative 1x minus 2x. And then the plus 2 doesn't change either. All right. Oops. Okay, so now let's cut that in half. And we'll factor out the GCF of both sides. So I'm going to imagine that I have a line right here. I'm going to factor out the GCF of these two, which will be x. And when I factor an x away from this one, 2 minus 1 is 1. And I'm going to factor x away from this one. So x, I factor out an x, I'm going to have nothing left, right? 1 minus 1 is 0 on the x, but I do still have that 1 there. Notice that the 6 right here that just came down, it didn't have anything to do with what's in the parentheses. Once we factor out that 6, we're going to leave it alone. All right, now let's look at these two. Well, I noticed that in the parentheses here, I have positive and then negative. So I want these to be positive and then negative as well. So I'm going to factor out a negative 2 in order to make that happen. And what I'll have left in the parentheses, negative 2 divided by negative 1 is 1x. And I'm going to have a minus because positive 2 divided by negative 2 is negative 1. All right, so that 6, again, on the outside just stays there. Now, the common thing to both of them, x minus 1, that's going to go in these first parentheses. And then behind them, x minus 2, x minus 2. And that's the answer. So I notice again that I have linear and then linear, x to the first and x to the first. So there's nothing left that I can factor. I have factored this one as far as I can. All right, let's scoot over here to number 3. All right, and we'll follow the same logic as we did on number 2. Looking at the numbers first, 3, 9, 3. All right, well, 3 can go into all of those. And now look at my variables, x to the third, x to the second, x to the first. Well, I can put x into all of those, right? I picked the smallest exponent, which is this one, x to the first. And now I'm going to divide. 3 minus 3 is 1. I can put that 1 or not put that 1. It's understood to be in the front. And then when I divide, I subtract my exponents. 3 minus 1 is 2. So I'm going to have x squared right here minus, all right, 9 divided by 3 is 3. And I had x to the second, factored out an x to the first. 2 minus 1 is 1, so I'm going to have x. And now here's one that's throwing some of you guys a little bit. This one is the same thing that I have out here. That doesn't mean I just quit. I still need to divide. 3 divided by 3 is 1. And I have x to the first, 1 minus 1 is 0. So I end up with this. Make sure you put that 1 in the parentheses. Some of you guys are dropping the 1. Okay, well, I see this one is quadratic. So I'm going to see if I can do a times c on this one as well. So a times c. A is that understood 1 again. And c is positive 1 at the end there. Here's a right here in front of the x squared. Here's c, which is 1. I'm ignoring the 3x completely. Once I get it outside the parentheses, I don't need it anymore. Equals 1. 1 times 1 is 1. So can you think of two numbers that multiply to be 1 and then add to be negative 3? Nope, me neither. So in this case, this quadratic doesn't factor. We're going to have to learn a different way to solve this one. But right now, there's nothing else we can do with that because it doesn't factor. Now, I'm not going to say it's prime because this one did factor. This one had a GCF. So I'm not going to write prime for the answer, but this part is prime. This part doesn't factor anymore. All right, let's move down here to number 4. Okay, GCF. See what you guys can think. Look at the 10 and the 4 and the 2. What will go into all of those? Right, 2. Okay, now look at your variables, x squared, x, and no x. Do they have a variable in common? No. So then we're done. I'm going to put my parentheses there. And then I'm going to divide. 10 divided by 2 is 5. I didn't factor out an x, so the variable isn't going to change. X to the second plus, okay, 4 divided by 2, well, that's 2. And again, I didn't factor out a variable, so the variable doesn't change. And now we have the same issue here that we had before. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Okay, so let's see if we can do AC on this one. A times C. All right, so A, sorry, the computer automatically capitalizes. A is the coefficient right here. Remember, not the variable, just the coefficient. So A is 10. And C, oh, nope, I looked at the wrong line. A is 5. Careful, don't do what I just did. Don't look back up here. Look inside the parentheses. A is 5. And C is 1 right here. 5 times 1 is 5. Okay, so can you guys think of two numbers that multiply to be 5 and add to be 2? Nope, me neither. So that means we're done. We cannot factor this quadratic any further. We have factored as far as we can. So we're going to learn a new technique for that one in just a little while. But for right now, that's as far as we can do. And again, we're not going to use the word prime because this one did factor. It had a GCF. But this quadratic inside the parentheses, this one is prime. This one doesn't factor any further. All right, let's go to number 5. All right. pause the video, see if you can factor 2x squared plus 4x minus 6. See if you can do that one on your own, and then we'll come back together. Okay, let's see how you guys did. 2, 4, and 6. The number that'll go into all of those is 2. And I look at my variables, x squared, x, and no x. Well, I can't put an x down there because they don't all three have that. So I'm ready for the parentheses. And now I'm going to divide. 2 divided by 2 is 1. I can put the 1 or not put the 1. It's understood to be there. And then x squared, because I didn't factor out any variable, I just leave that as it is. All right, 4 divided by 2 is 2. X, again, I didn't factor out any variable, so that x is just going to stay right there. Minus 6 divided by 2 is 3. And I have that. Okay, so let's see if we can do a times c on this one. So a is the understood 1 right here. Oops. And c is the negative 3 right there. A times c is negative 3. All right, can we think of two numbers that multiply together to be negative 3 and add together to be positive 2? All right, think for just a second. Yeah, very good. The numbers are 3 and negative 1. Positive 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. Positive 3 plus negative 1 is positive 2. Okay, so again, pause the video, see if you guys can rewrite. Okay, let's see what you got. So that 2 on the front should stay there. And then inside the parentheses, the x squared part doesn't change. We're not doing anything with the a term. What we're working on right now is the b term. And we're going to replace it with these two, remembering to keep that same variable on it every time. So I've got plus 3x minus 1x, and then the c doesn't change, minus 3 at the end there. Okay, now we're going to cut it in half. That 2 on the outside, y'all don't lose that 2. Some of y'all made that disappear during class. Okay, see if you can finish it up from there. Pause the video and see if y'all can finish it up. All right, let's see how you did. On those first two, you should have factored out an x. What they have in common is x. So if I reduce each of those exponents by 1, I get x to the first and no x right there. And then I hope you remember to factor out a negative 1 on these so that they would match negative, and I need positive and positive. So dividing both of those by negative 1, I get positive x plus 3. All right, and now I'm ready to write my final answer. The 2 on the outside stays there. And then inside the parentheses, I've got the x plus 3 that they have in common. And then right behind that, I've got the x minus 1. If you chose to put x minus 1 first and then x plus 3, that's okay. That's the same thing. It doesn't matter. All right, let's go to the last one. Okay, again, pause the video, see if you can figure out the GCF of that last one, factor it out on your own, and then we'll check together. Okay, let's see what you got. Hopefully you found 2x. 2 goes into 2, 4, and 2. And I can see they all have an x in common. The lowest exponent is 1 right there. All right, let's divide and see what we get. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then I'm going to have x to the second because 3 minus 1 is 2. Plus, all right, now this one. 4 divided by 2 is 2. And then on my exponents, I take that 2 and subtract away the 1 that I factored out, and I get x. And then the very last one, 2 divided by 2 is 1. This time the 1 is not understood because that x is going to go away. So I have to put the 1 there because there's nothing else with it. Okay, this one also factors. If I did AC, I would have 1 times 1 equals 2. And two numbers that multiply, 1 times 1 is 1. Two numbers that multiply to be 1 and add to be 2 are 1 and 1. Oops, I can't get it to stay on the line there. There we go. 1 and 1. And then the video is going to end, so I'm going to let y'all finish it from there.